Radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello and welcome back to Dave and Mackie's Shiny Side Out, show number 450. That's 50 and 400. 450, that's just nuts, right? It's like 900. That's about 1,000 hours worth of content that you can access if you want to on the archives. Yes, the Freedom Slips Archive Revolutionary Radio. Just go and subscribe. $5. That's all it costs. So if you can, do. Or buy some of the sponsor products. Yes, that's also good. I can guarantee you that this radio station is not supported by any corporate giant. It's just not the case, and it's just not. Yeah. So if you like what you hear, if you like the host, if you're having a bit of fun listening to this, maybe it's on a rerun, maybe it's on YouTube. Go and find the website. Go and find it. Just go on it. There might even be some products that you like. It's quite possible. It's a whole bunch of good stuff there. And this is really one of those few stations that doesn't really drive an agenda. I think you will find that the hosts themselves are varied and not always in complete sync with the things they say, and we don't think it should be either. Opinion, free opinion, and free information and accurate information is a right, I believe. Make up your own mind, get as much information as you can, and that's really our job here, right? We are talking about Bigfoot, Yeti, Alma, and the gang. The last time we talked about them was show 80. Believe it or not, show 80. Oh my God, that's just crazy. That's like 8 years ago.
Wow.
And funnily enough, it's also, I guess, again, we had a show cycle prior to this, but the biological artifacts, where we paid homage to Lloyd Pye. Lloyd Pye, who passed away some time ago, who was, in fact, this was his field of research. That's what the hominoids. He was interested in hominids, I should say. He was interested in this research. That was his particular bag, and he came up on the Star Child skull by coincidence, right? People approached him at a conference and said, "Hey, what do you make of this?" And I urge you to do your own research into the Star Child skull and think what you think. It's like and find out what you want and just make up your own mind, because it's fascinating stuff. But here, this is important because Bigfoot, and let's call it Bigfoot as a collective. These creatures, wild men, they're called as well, wild women, I guess, as well. They are everywhere. It's a planet-wide phenomenon. People always think, oh, it's Yeti and Bigfoot, right? So Yeti in the Himalayas and Bigfoot or Sasquatch in North America. The answer is no. It's not. It's not only those two. This phenomenon is across every single country in the world. They're called different things everywhere. They're even different sizes, Dave. Smaller ones, larger ones, different color.
Yeah, the Malaysian one is quite small and more orangutan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's called the orang padang, the small man, orang padang, right? So there's the orang utang, and then it's the orang padang, which is the other one, and they're everywhere, Dave. They're everywhere. They're sometimes in swamps, but they're always in wilderness areas that are hard to get to. They're always in areas that are not easily accessible by us, the Homo sapiens, the killer ape. Advisedly so, I'm sure, right? And funnily enough as well, the sightings of these creatures. Or people, there might be people, who knows, is not always, but quite often associated with UFO sightings as well, and other strange phenomena, a la Skinwalker Ranch.
I have no reason, Mackie, to suggest that they're not people of their own kind.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In all of this, non-binary, well, who says a cryptid can't be the same? Yeah,
completely. And the funny thing is this, right? And this is something that we'll discuss toward the end of the show cycle, as we delve into the book by Richard Cremo, the abridged version of Forbidden Archaeology. The history of our world, the fossil record at least, or not the accepted fossil record, but the fossil record as it presents itself to us in findings that are not completely accepted by mainstream science for various reasons, it shows cohabitation or coexistence. What do I mean by that? So today, Homo sapiens, that's us, we coexist with We coexist with gorilla, with bonobo chimpanzees, orangutan, etc. Right? All these what we like to call apes, or the great apes. And in German they're called Menschenaffen, which means human apes. And the critical thing is they have no tails. So monkeys have tails, apes do not.
That's correct.
But we coexist. So if anybody were to unearth, let's say the Chicago Zoo gets buried under a meter of volcanic ash from Yellowstone, right? But there it is, boom. And during the day and when it's full of visitors. So what you would find then in 10,000 years and 100,000 years time when people start digging, you'd find a layer where you find Homo sapiens skeletons next to skeletons of gorillas.
Oh, they
and
cohabitate.
orangutans. Yeah, right? And you go, clearly the human skeletons must have been introduced. Because it's clear that these primitive creatures can't coexist with the more developed creatures. And this is where it all falls down in a way, because like I said many times before, and I keep harping in on it, once you've reached a let's call it evolutionary optimum, right? Why change? Why change? Let's assume evolution is a thing, right? For a second, if your body and etc. has gotten to a point where it wouldn't make any sense to change anymore, right? Like, and again, I believe there is a guiding principle involved here, because I think your genes and body are responding to outside pressures, and that's really what punctuated equilibrium is all about. Something that Dave mentioned earlier. And I think your DNA specifically can react to that. Now that raises a whole raft of other questions around, well, what's DNA? How did it come about? Is it programmed? Is it not programmed? It's certainly one of the most comprehensive survival tools that we've ever come across. DNA, that is. Anyway, the point is that we might very well coexist still with a species we have not yet discovered, and we've discussed with you as well why that is not such a far-fetched thing. We come across new things all the time. You'd think we wouldn't. I mean, I just want to quickly mention this again. I said it last week. We found a mucus gland in our nose, 2.5 inches of mucus gland, or 2, I should say, because it's a bisymmetrical thing. After 2,000 years or more of anatomy and autopsy and cutting people apart and looking at the internal structures, we are finding that now a 2.5 or 2.5 inch mucus glands.
That's right.
Dave,
Didn't see that coming.
Same, right? And we find large animals as well. Maybe we found like Homo forensis just a few years ago. The small hobbit-like creature that we just didn't know existed at all. And there it is. So we find new things all the time. And one of the biggest things, we shared this with you last week, one of the biggest criticisms that these scientists make is that, well, if Yeti and Sasquatch, etc., if they really existed, we should have found something by now. DNA or bones or whatever. Well, no.
Hang on, I'm going to make the sound from the game shows. Brum, brum.
Exactly. Because we didn't find anything about Homo forensis. And they were contemporaries to us until, a few thousand years ago. Okay, until a few thousand years ago, Homo forensis and Homo sapiens coexisted in Papua New Guinea. That's a thing. That's not, that's really strange, isn't it? But it's a fact. So, and fossilization and finding, bones, etc., in the wild, that's really an unusual thing. So fossilization is to the side, that's highly unusual. But even to find cadavers and such, even scat, which is the excrement or other things of animals, is not that common necessarily unless there's a massive population. And they also say, we need to. They would need such and such a population to sustain themselves. Well, that's our opinion. We find extinct species all the time. Oh, recently there's a bird, right? That was found. Oh, this bird is extinct. No, it's not. We just find surviving populations of these things all the time, where we think it's extinct, but no, it's not extinct. I'm not even talking about coelacanth now, right? I'm talking about more recent times where we think certain birds or marsupials or mammals have gone extinct, or even amphibians or reptilians, only to find them in the wild. So we think we have a good beat on how many individual animals there exist. I don't think we do at all. We have no clue. We think 3 billion animals were killed in the fires in Australia last summer. 3 billion. Maybe the number's high, maybe the number's lower. But my point is, we don't have a very good bead on the numbers. And if you've ever gone camping, or gone into the wild. I'm not talking about deserts now. I'm talking about forests, swamplands, jungles, whatever. Right? They are massive. And if you're in truly a virgin forest, you can't see 10 feet in front of you. Yeah, movement becomes very difficult to see. And if a creature is camouflaged and knows how to move in the wild, like we don't, right? We just don't, because we stink up the place, and creatures run from us, unless you're trained. We will never come across them, and they will do whatever they can to avoid us. I mean, if they are what I think they are, they would have been coexisting with us for hundreds of thousands of years, and they know full well that we are a species best avoided. Okay, and I don't subscribe at all to the scientific statement that we should have found something by now. No, not at all, because we're finding new things all the time. Once we have cut down the last tree, Dave, and poisoned the last river, and drained the last lake, and we haven't found any of these creatures, okay, I'm wrong. Then I'll say, yeah, I'm wrong. Nothing here. Until that has happened, the jury is out as far as I'm concerned. And that's just the preamble for today's show.
Awesome. No, it's completely true. And, let's get straight into it.
Which brings us, and Dave, this is, if you don't mind sharing it, this is a recent article, May 1, 2019, that was published. And I thought it was very interesting. Just if you want to share with us, my friend.
So, India's army claims it found Yeti footprints in Nepal. The world is skeptical. This is by Deanna Paul and Tanya Dutta, as Meki said, May 1st, 2019. And it says, breaking news, Yeti are real, and they're on the move. At least according to the Indian army, which said Monday, I sound like Captain Kirk, which said Monday that its mountaineering expedition team stumbled upon a set of mysterious footprints in Nepal this month. No, we are not confirming that this elusive snowman actually exists, but while the prints may be a fraud, the report seems to be real. The army tweeted from its official account Monday that an expedition team had come across, then in quotes, mysterious footprints of mythical beast Yeti measuring 32 by 15 inches close to Makalu base camp on the 9th of April 2019. The post included several photos. True believers on Twitter congratulated the army, but by and large the internet wasn't having it, and many of the army's 6 million followers were less than impressed. Many questions were hurled, scorn was heaped, and there was the understandable skepticism about the mythical Yeti, also known as the abominable snowman, which lore, L-O-R-E, describes as a giant ape-like creature living in the Himalayas. Some Twitter users were particularly harsh in their disparagement. Couldn't you guys call a single animal expert before posting this? One person wrote. Others were simply confused, asking, is this some prank? The detail that most undercut the army's claim was that the footprint photos seem to suggest that the alleged Yeti is one-legged, which skeptics were quick to point out. One asked whether the beast travels by jumping. Very Carl Sagan. There were many comical comparisons to the adventures of Tintin. I always knew Tintin was right. He was the first to spot the mysterious beast Yeti, one user tweeted. Some were more measured in their response, debunking the claim and occasionally offering alternative, more realistic explanations. Perhaps the footprints were from a snowshoer, for example. The army's response to the social media frenzy, well, it confirmed that the videos and photographic evidence had been handed over to subject matter experts. Still, it said it wanted to publicly share the news to excite scientific temper and rekindle the interest. BBC reported.
Now, and this is from the Washington Post. Now, oddly enough, Dave, there hasn't been a follow-on article that I could find. So if any of our listenership have any insight into this at all, I have not found anything following up, denying or confirming, which in my mind, because denying would have come out immediately. Right? Well, yeah, it's all nonsense. It's not at all that. No one has come up with anything saying anything, neither denying or confirming. So if anybody has something on this, follow up, such as this, I would love to hear it. But that's the most recent, I guess, official posting I could find around a sighting of this nature. And this again came from the Indian Army, right? This is not just some dude that went hiking in the Himalayas. This was what you would think is a fairly serious kind of organization, I would think. But yeah, nothing. No follow-up, no confirmation, no denial.
Well, last week, Mickey, we mentioned on the show that the Edmund Hillary's diary mentioned there being footprints already up there of a considerable size.
Yep.
And, well, this isn't new to us, you and I, that there's footprints there of a creature. Look, I would like to think it was real, and it was there, and it has just kept completely out of our way, because wouldn't you?
Look, I'm a romantic, so the answer is yes. But I don't have to be a romantic. I mean, I love science. Sometimes I might sound like I don't. I do. Science is a fantastic tool, and I'm deep down. The scientific method is brilliant. But I'm also a true scientist, where I will go wherever the evidence goes. However flimsy or thin the evidence, I will follow it. Now, I've got no credentials to worry about. I can say whatever I want on there, right? But I'm also a skeptic, right? Meaning, I don't just take something at face value, but what we should follow up all the evidence, right? Not just dismiss it out of hand, which is what's happening with most of these things, right? Now, just by saying here in the article, some were more measured in their response, debunking the claim and occasionally offering alternative, more realistic explanations. Who determines what is more realistic, right? And who's going to have egg on their face when we finally come across these creatures? By the way, Dave, I hope we never do. I hope these creatures, these people, will stay out of our way until the end of time. That's what I hope. Right, so I don't have to be.
I know.
Just wipe them out, man.
Sadly,
we would. Okay, so I don't need to be vindicated here, right? There's so many fantastical things happening in the world. This is just one other one, and this is probably one of the less fantastical ones if you look at it from a real, I guess, realism point of view. So we're saying there are creatures out there, or people, that are out there, maybe similar to us in intelligence, maybe not, but. They live out there in the most inaccessible places on the planet, right? And we haven't really captured anyone yet, and we haven't really come across them, etc., etc. Now, locals have. There are stories of women being raped by these things in China, and I saw this video, and I haven't been able to find it. I'll redouble my efforts, but there was a black and white video. It was clearly shot somewhere in Asia, potentially Tibet, China, that kind of thing. It showed a very large Chinese-looking man. Now, when I say very large, he was standing at least a meter taller than everybody else, and he had some quite primitive features as well. So what the video said is, this is a video taken of such and such, and his mother claimed to have been raped by a wild man, a Yeti, right? And if you look at the child, or the alleged child, in that video, you see clearly that it's a hybrid between, well, us and something else. Okay, and it was to me it was just compelling, and I thought, wow. But yeah, I haven't been able to locate that video again. I just came across it by complete coincidence. I think I pointed it out to you at some point.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yes.
So, is this proof positive? No, it's not. Of course it isn't. But we should not be so quick to dismiss these things. But I understand why. Because science is these days, it's a profession, right? So science only exists as long as people are willing to fund it. Okay, it's always been that way. Art or sciences have always relied on sponsors. Back in the olden days, there used to be royalty or nobility. These days, the corporations or governments, right? But if your specific science doesn't net any benefit, and if you can't convince people that you should pursue your specific interests or scientific endeavors, you're not going to get any funding, and you're not going to get anywhere, right? So funding and grants, tenure, all these things become important if you want to make a living. If you're independently wealthy, and good for you, you can investigate whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. Schliemann, Thomas Schliemann, the guy who found Troy, he was not an archaeologist. He wasn't even a historian. He was a layman who read the Odyssey and said, well, I think Homer said that Troy is here, so I'm going to look here. And lo and behold, he did find it. Others did similar things. But the point here is that if you're part of the scientific establishment, there's certain rules that you have to follow. Your literature is peer-reviewed, and if you come up with ideas that are just too far out there, you just don't get it published. You can't get it published, right? And you would need a lot of support from a lot of people before you come up with something that is completely new. Do you know what's so funny? There was this guy in Melbourne. I read this in Nexus. This is important for this whole show cycle. I think at Nexus magazine, and he had come up with a unique way of treating cancer. What he had found is that the lower intestine, I think it's either the lower intestine or the large intestine, had its own immune system. Yeah.
Same.
Sorry. Is it? Well, there are two
there is a small intestine and a large intestine. And large is the lower. Yep.
Correct. You're sorry. You're quite right. Now, one of them, and I can never remember which, but one of them has their own immune system, right? One of them. And what he had found is he could synthesize out of the cells of this particular intestinal system a serum, with which he could fight cancer, and it worked. Now he was driven because his father had died of cancer, etc. I'll try to locate the article and share the detail with you guys. But then he tried to publish it. This is a guy in Melbourne, remember, in Australia. This is a few years ago. Well, actually, not by now. It would have been about 20, 30 years ago. But he couldn't get published. And you know why he couldn't get published, Dave? This is from his article in the magazine, because his research didn't build on anything. So they asked him, so where are these papers that have gone before you upon which you built your research? Well, there aren't any. Well, what do you mean? My research is completely original. That just wasn't acceptable.
Here it is.
Yeah, no good at all. So you go, well, right. So it didn't get published. So we haven't got this cure for cancer that he developed, right? Because it didn't form part of the establishment per se. Right? Never mind that it's effective. That's irrelevant. Right? So it's really interesting to see that. And I'm not saying that all of science is like that. I'm not all scientists. I'm not saying that all of academia is like that. But I do believe there's self-censorship, and I do believe there's a filter. And I also believe there are acceptable topics and then unacceptable topics of research. And I think that particular thing is driven by a completely different agenda that is set much higher than the highest levels of academia. That's my opinion. So certain areas of research are completely discouraged. Gravity research, or anti-gravity, I should say. Completely discouraged. No one's looking at that anymore, okay? Or at least we don't know about it. Most of the Tesla research, bits and pieces here and there, but for the most part, his patents are
they were taken from his apartment by the FBI.
Yeah. Gone, right? So there are areas of research which we seemingly have just completely disregarded. And you ask yourself, well, just what are they, and where would we be if we had access to that? I can tell you that the research is continuing. There's a secret space program. There's a whole bunch of other secret programs which are not for the great unwashed, i.e. You and I. Not for us, Dave. Right? It's not for us to know. Yeah. But look,
I have to accept, Meg, I'm just going to say this. I have to accept that there is things that I don't need to know, because that it is in a specific realm of research or, military security, for instance, that the public shouldn't know. Does it make sense? I just want everyone to know that there are certain things that if you're doing research that no one should have access to, because that means within the serviceable life of the thing you've made, you could get leaked and the enemy could derive an advantage from knowing that information. However, saying that, I completely understand that there are definitely things that could benefit the whole of society if they were true, if the rumors were worked out to be real. And in fact, there were facts that, the anti-gravity, for instance, was determined a long time ago and already done. And remember the fellow, Meki, that we interviewed, who said that they worked on anti-gravity and succeeded in Pine Gap. They made that. International scientists from all around the world working together in the one location. Sandeo, it was, that declared that on our show. And now, look, having said that, why it still astounds me, Mackie. If you could change the planet, if it could be part of the Great Reset, just give everyone this thing, right?
Oh, the Great Reset.
You know what because we spoke of this last week, right? The Great Reset.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
it is gaining momentum, this Great Reset. The discussions are becoming louder, and they're reaching more corners of the globe. So, look, if it did, and it was a benefit to society, and and we couldn't, derive a threat from it, but we all benefited. I see that as being a thing. I would like to have a dirt floor and a replicator. I don't care about the rest of life, right? Because
100%.
that would solve all of the problems we have right now.
So yeah, unlimited energy and moving beyond scarcity society.
Yeah,
right?
exactly
that's what
right.
we need to do. 100%. Look, and in fact, just very quickly to the Great Reset, I did buy a whole bunch of magazines this week, including Time Magazine, etc., and they're all talking about the Great Reset. Articles by Charles Schwab and others. I'll analyze them. I'll digest them. Then I will spew them back at you next Sunday.
Looking forward to it. Actually, but we can't because we have a special guest. Yes, it is.
Is it next Sunday? Oh, sweet. Okay, look, then the Sunday after. All good. But it's a topic now. It's out there. The Great Reset is flooding the ether. But let's get back into this now. What we're going to discuss here very quickly with you guys, or take you through, is the official development of the Homo species, right? Our species. Genetic studies show that the primates diverged from other mammals about 85 million years ago in the late Cretaceous period, and the earliest fossils appear in the Paleocene around 55 million years ago. Well, that's what science knows to this day. The family Hominidae diverged from the Hylobatidae, which are the gibbon family, 15 to 20 million years ago, and around 14 million years ago, the Ponginae, or orangutans, diverged from the Hominidae family. Bipedalism is the adaptation adaptation of the hominin line, and the earliest bipedal hominin is considered to be either Sahelanthropus or Auroran, with Ardipithecus, a full bipedal, coming somewhat later. So bipedal just meaning, walking on 2 feet. The earliest documented members of the genus Homo are Homo habilis, which evolved around 2.3 million years ago, the earliest species for which there's a positive evidence of use of stone tools, and that's really what Homo habilis means, the human being that uses tools. The brains of these early hominins were about the same size as that of a chimpanzee. During the next million years, a process of encephalization began, and with the arrival of Homo erectus in the fossil record, cranial capacity had doubled to 850 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus and Homo ergaster were the first homina to leave Africa, they believe, and these species spread through Africa, Asia, and Europe between 1.3 to 1.8 million years ago. It is believed that these species were the first to use fire and complex tools. According to the recent African ancestor theory, modern humans evolved in Africa possibly from Homo heidelbergensis, Homo rhodesiensis, or Homo antecessor, and migrated out of the continent some 50 to 100,000 years ago. We know that is probably not true, because we found evidence to the contrary. Replacing local populations of Homo erectus, Homo denisova, Homo floresiensis, and Homo neanderthalensis. So that is also not correct, as we know now. We didn't replace those local populations, but we interbred with them, which means we are the same species. Archaic Homo sapiens, the forerunner of anatomically modern humans, evolved between 400 and 250,000 years ago. Again, this is something that Dave and I question quite strongly. Recent DNA evidence suggests that several haplotypes of Neanderthal origin are present among all non-African populations, and Neanderthals and other hominids, such as Denisova hominin, may have contributed up to 6% of the genome to present-day humans. Anatomically, modern humans evolved from archaic Homo sapiens in the Middle Paleolithic about 200,000 years ago. the transition to behavioral modernity with the development of symbolic culture, language, and specialized lithic technology, which is really just stone technology, happened around 50,000 years ago, according to many anthropologists, although some suggest a gradual change in behavior over a longer time span. So, just to be very clear, right? This is where the official story leads us, right? That's pretty cut and dry, pretty straightforward. And if you stay within that kind of field of study, and you're fine. Your careers look after you, be okay. Just keep finding more stuff to support this, and ignore all the stuff it doesn't. Okay. Just on that, Dave, there's a fantastic documentary that I was recently able to watch, and I'll tell you what it's called. It's called, where are we? Blah blah blah. Just bear with me, just 1 second. I do want everybody to see if they can find it and watch it, because it is very much along the lines of what we've been discussing. It is more impactful if it is a movie, like a documentary, if it's a visual medium. It's just more impactful than just listening to us talk. And, I wish I could just quickly find that. Here we go. It's called Alien Worlds, Giants and Hybrids. Okay, Giant Hybrids. It's made in 2020, and look, I think it might be Netflix, but I don't want to. Let me just double check what it is. It could be, if it is Netflix, just see if you can get it there. It might be Amazon or whatever, but I'll tell you in a second exactly who came up with it. I'm just running the beginning here. It might have been History Channel, but this documentary, which is about an hour long, so you're not
an easy investment.
Spending too much time on it, and easy investment. And it talks, and this is really important. It talks about the Smithsonian and the Smithsonian's role in finding or covering up these finds, right? And they don't say there was this great conspiracy. They simply said it was just taken away. It was just maybe even destroyed, or it was just forgotten. And there was no necessarily conspiracy behind it. And sorry, it doesn't actually say which channel it's from. But I would definitely suggest you go and have a look. Alien Worlds, Giants and Hybrids, 2020. And it's really important to understand the Smithsonian did collect all these giant skeletons, etc. Right? And now, where are they?
You can't ask that,
find them
Mickey.
anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And similarly though, because these Yeti, Bigfoot, etc., some of them are quite large, right? So how many races of man, or how many sentient races have we forgotten? All right, how many sentient races would like to be forgotten by us? All right, and how many survive still to this day?
Just make it up.
Yeah. And we've done quite a good job of getting rid of the evidence that was uncovered in its heyday during the 19th and early 20th century. There were mountains of evidence for that.
So think about this, in all of the glyphs we see around the world, all the petroglyphs, we see depictions of regular humans and then the giants. In the biblical text from all around the world, we see and they make reference to giants. Even the Bible makes reference to giants as the Nephilim. We have this in the Sumerians talk about and depict with pictures, people who were seated and still taller than us. This is a thing. They were there. We've discovered the bones, and yet seeing it maybe gives us a certain discomfort in the Smithsonian's perspective. And, let's just put that through the crusher. Don't need to know about that. Let's take it off display. Is definitely what they've done. Because people claim as a child, Mickey, seeing the skulls and bones and examples of giants. And now they're not available any longer.
But they're not available anymore. So if anybody, and look, I'm sure there are private collections out there, and maybe even some of our listeners that have. If any of you have access to these bones,
3 foot thigh bone,
ideally skulls, even, let's put it through DNA testing. Let's why not? Let's do that. I mean, let's put it to rest. I'd be fascinated by it. But Dave, to take us through what Lloyd Pye or Lloyd Pye's definition, because I mean we've given you the official story, fair enough. That's as far as we've gone so far in science. It's always changing. It's moving further and further back in time. Not far enough as far as I'm concerned yet, but certainly moving back. But Lloyd Pye obviously spent a lot of his time looking at the what he termed hominoids, right? And why don't you take us through some of his thinking?
Mackie and I interviewed Lloyd, and it was a tremendous interview, and we're lucky to have him. So, hominids, or hominoids, as he's writing here, it technically means a member of the biological superfamily of Hominoidea, including modern great apes, humans, and several extinct ancestors and relatives. The term has fallen from favour with modern scientists who want to categorise humans and the so-called pre-humans as hominin, thus hominoid. Thus hominoid has been adopted to describe the controversial family of upright, walking, hair-covered primates that live on every continent on Earth except Antarctica so far. These primates are known by different names in different cultures. Bigfoot in the US, Sasquatch in Canada, Yowie in Australia, or the hairy man, Yeti and abominable snowman in the Himalayas, the Alma in Eastern Europe, and various other names around the world. These hominoids are generally dismissed as delusion or superstition by the bulk of mainstream scientists, but a growing number of serious researchers and specialists are investigating the obvious fact that these primates exist and have existed on Earth for millions of years. Number 1, Bigfoot / Sasquatch, because the border is irrelevant, are by far the most famous 7 to 10 feet tall, weighing 700 to 1,000 pounds. That's about 500 kilos, or 480. They live in the deep, dense montane forests, or that's northern Montana, I suppose. Montane, if that's true. That surround the Earth, or maintain maybe a type of forest, surround the Earth at higher elevations in temperate latitudes. Number 2, the abominable snowman, or the Yeti types, are human-sized but far more robust than humans, 5 to 7 feet tall, weighing 5 to 700 pounds. They seem to live only in valleys in the Himalayan mountain ranges, a combined area as large as the US. They are most primate-like of the 4 main types, with similarities to chimps and gorillas in physiology and temperament. Number 3, the Alma, or the Captar types, are also human-sized, 5 to 7 feet tall and weighing 5 to 700 pounds, and also living in dense forests around the world, but at lower elevations than Bigfoot and Sasquatch types. They are most human-like of all 3 large types. And I personally, this is Lloyd saying, I personally suspect these types will prove to be living Neanderthals. That's his suspicion. The Agogwe, or Setapar types, are pygmy-sized to 3 to 4 feet tall and weighing 2 to 300 pounds, living in thick sweeps of jungles that surround the Earth along its equatorial regions. They seem to live in small groups or tribes, whereas the other 3 types are believed to function mostly as small independent family units.
Yeah. Now, let's go on to the detail of the people, creatures. Also, just in the chat, I do apologize. I hadn't been monitoring the chat just now. I had been concentrating on the text and listening to Dave, and Dave, I'm sure, did the same. So, Stardust Man, on not much to it. Could you please restate your question, because I can't. I'm scrolling back through the chat. I can't see a question. There's no one at Studio
So
A
it must
looking
be
at the
prior
chat.
to
We are,
that.
but all I see is. Yeah, so clearly, all I see is links to websites and YouTube clips, etc. So I can't actually open them up during the show. I haven't got time to watch them. But if there's a question
write it out.
that you guys want to
write
ask,
it out now.
please.
We're here.
You could,
sorry.
Yeah, please write it out again. We're looking at it now, so again, apologies. And again, this is interactive, and normally we are much better at monitoring the chat. So Stardust Man or Not Much to It or Flippy or whoever asked the question. If you guys could please ask it again, that would be helpful, because I can't see a question in the chat. Anyway, so while you hopefully type the question into the chat, Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch in Canadian folklore and American folklore, is an ape-like creature that inhabits the forests of North America. Evidence of Bigfoot's existence is based on a number of disputed short videos, photographs, visual sightings, casts of large footprints, etc. Folklorists trace the figure of Bigfoot to a combination of factors and sources, including folklore surrounding the European wild man figure, folk belief among Native Americans and loggers, and a cultural increase in environmental concerns. Within the fringe subculture of, I love that term, within the fringe subculture of cryptozoology, Bigfoot is considered a cryptid. However, the majority of mainstream scientists have historically discounted the existence of Bigfoot, considering it to be a combination of folklore, misidentification, and hoax, rather than a living animal. Bigfoot is usually described as a large, hairy, bipedal humanoid. The term Sasquatch is an anglicized derivative of the Halkomelem word Saskete, or Saskets. Right? Before 1958, wildman stories are found among the indigenous population of the Pacific Northwest. So this has nothing to do with the white man coming. The legends existed prior to a single name for the creature. And this is really the point here as well. Across the world, there are many different many different names for ultimately a very similar phenomenon. And again, the difference in these phenomena is the size of the creature, really, right? So there are probably different populations of different types of creatures, but they're all of a similar origin, I should think. They differed in their details both regionally and between families in the same community. Similar stories of wild men are found on every continent except Antarctica, as far as we know. Ecologist Robert Michael Pyle argues that most cultures have human-like giants in their folk history. We have this need for some larger-than-life creature. Okay, that's nice.
I wasn't sure that
no
I
further
had
evidence.
the need for one. I suppose it'd be good in the transit lane.
I think they exist in these cultures because they existed or exist today.
It'd be good.
That's
though,
my opinion,
right?
right?
In a transit
And members
lane,
of the
right?
I know, right?
That's.
Members of the
I was just going to explain the transit lane. Don't worry, they can look it up.
Okay. Members of the Lumi tell tales about Tsemeques, the local version of Bigfoot. The stories are similar to each other in terms of the general description of Tsemeques, but details about the creature's diet and activities differ between the stories of different families. Some regional versions contained more nefarious creatures. The Stiyaha, or Kwi-Kwia, were a nocturnal race that children were told not to say the names of, lest the monsters hear and come to carry off a person, sometimes to be killed. In 1847, Paul Kane reported stories by the native people about Skookums, a race of cannibalistic wild men living on the peak of Mount St. Helens. The Skookums appear to have been regarded as supernatural rather than natural. Less menacing versions, such as the one recorded by Reverend Elkanah Walker, exist as well. In 1840, Walker, a Protestant missionary, recorded stories of giants among the Native Americans living in Spokane, Washington. The Indians claimed that these giants lived on and around the peaks of nearby mountains and stole salmon from the fishermen's nets. That's a very clear indication of the physical evidence here, right? Various local legends were compiled by J.W. Burns in a series of Canadian newspaper articles in the 1920s. Each language had its own name for the local version. Many names meant something along the lines of wild man or hairy man, although other names described comic actions it was said to perform. For example, eating clams.
Yeah,
Dave?
frontiersman Daniel Boone. We all grew up hearing stories about the great Daniel Boone. Reported having shot and killed a 10-foot hairy giant he called a Yahoo. Folktale scholar Hugh H. Truty has argued that Boone's account may have been the inspiration for some of the Bigfoot stories. Oh. It hurts my brain sometimes, Becky, I have to be honest, that they find these connections somehow. Oh, it must have been a story. No, it could have been real. Sightings. About a third of all reports of Bigfoot sightings are concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, with most of the remaining reports spread throughout the rest of North America. That's interesting because they could be migratory, or they could just, appear in come down in UFOs. Could be the food source that moves around. Some Bigfoot advocates, such as John Wilson Green, have postulated that Bigfoot is a worldwide phenomenon. Well, it wasn't just John that did that. I'm sorry, I should keep reading and then criticize later. Bigfoot has been reported and documented for hundreds of years. First sighting by a white man occurred in 1811 by David Thompson. A trader named David Thompson spotted some footprints 14 inches long, 8 inches wide, and with 4 toes in the snow. 1924, prospector Albert Otzman claimed to have been abducted by Sasquatch and held captive by the creatures in British Columbia. 1924 again, Fred Beck claimed that he and 4 other miners were attacked one night in July 1924 by several ape men throwing rocks at their cabin in an area later called Ape Canyon in Washington. Wow, that's throwing rocks and knocking on trees is so common. Beck said that the miners shot and possibly killed at least one of the creatures, but precipitating an attack on their cabin, during which the creatures bombarded the cabin with rocks and tried to break in. The supposed incident was widely reported at the time. Beck wrote a book about the alleged event in 1967, that's the year I was born, in which he argued that the creatures were mystical beings from another dimension. Okay, claiming that he had experienced psychic premonitions and visions his entire life, in which ape men were only one component. Speleologist William Halliday argued in 1983 that the story arose from an incident in which hikers from a nearby camp had thrown rocks onto the cabin. There are also local rumours that pranksters harassed the men and planted faked footprints. Mekki.
In 1941, Jeannie Chapman and her children said they had escaped their home when a 7.5 feet or 2.3 meter tall Sasquatch approached their residence in Ruby Creek, British Columbia. 1958, a bulldozer operator, Jerry Crew, took to a newspaper office a cast of one of the enormous footprints he and other workers had seen at an isolated worksite at Bluff Creek in California. The crew was overseen by Wilbur J. Wallace, brother of Raymond L. Wallace. After Ray Wallace's death, his children came forward with a pair of 16-inch 41 centimeter wooden feet, which they said their father had used to fake the Bigfoot tracks in 1958. Wallace is poorly regarded by many Bigfoot proponents. John Napier wrote, "I do not feel impressed with Mr. Wallace's story regarding having over 15,000 feet or 4,500 meters of film showing Bigfoot." In 1965, Bigfoot was officially put on the endangered species list in Russia. And in 1967, Germany and France followed suit. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? In fact, there's some more scientific definitions around that as well, and later that we're going to go through.
That's the most significant step.
In 1965,
yes,
isn't it though? Yeah. So Bigfoot was officially put on the endangered species list in Russia. And in 1967, Germany and France followed suit again. In 1919, Fred Jankart attacked and killed in Maine. Was attacked and killed in Maine. Attacker was unknown, but blamed on an 8-foot male individual with a disfigured face, ape-like, non-English speaking. The male individual didn't stop grunting until Fred's skull was shattered, and he then retreated into the woods. Jim Giamboni Archilli, clearly an eyewitness, said here. In 1940, flags were raised in Arizona when a deer was brutally killed by a group of Mexican men. Translators say that the men were sacrificing the deer for a giant mono, which means ape, they had seen while crossing the border. They said that the animal had been following them for over 10 miles. Flags 2010, This is fairly recent. Outside Boise, Idaho, new artifacts were found in multiple caves portraying a giant bear, consistently walking on its hind legs like a man. Now, bears do rear up. bears do rear up, right? They do not walk any great distance though on their hind legs. Their anatomy the anatomy doesn't allow for it, right? I mean, they can walk a bit, but ultimately, I would not. And plus, a bear is clearly a bear, and if you're a lay person doesn't go in the wild, then you're forgiven for mistaking a bear maybe for something else, sure. But if you've got people that are wilderness people, they especially native people. I mean, if the native people said, "Oh, there's a giant bear living there," then they would have said, "There's a giant bear living there," if that's what it was. They wouldn't have said there was a hairy wild man. They would have called it a bear. Is my point, right? So these Native Americans are closer to nature and they know the environment a lot better than the subsequent white settlers. But if it were a bear, they would have said, "Hey, there's a really big bear. Don't go there." They didn't say that. They said there's a hairy wild man, or whatever they called it, a Sasquatch, this and that. And that's really important, because if it's a known phenomenon, then you call it that. That's what you call. I mean, people are fairly straightforward and simple that way, right? If it's something they don't know, they call it whatever they think it is, right? If they know what it is, they say what it is. So it's human nature to do that. Now, what's the description of the Bigfoot? People claim to have seen Bigfoot, describing it as a large, hairy, muscular, bipedal, ape-like creature, roughly 6 to 9 feet tall. That's 1.8 to 2.7 meters. So that's pretty tall. Covered in hair, described as black, dark brown, or even dark reddish. So probably going from gorilla hair down into a orangutan kind of hair. The enormous footprints for which the creature is named are claimed to be as large as 24 inches, 60 centimeters long, and 8 inches, 20 centimeters wide. Some footprint casts have also contained claw marks, making it likely that they came from known animals such as bears, which have 5 toes and claws. Maybe not. Now, according to David Dagling. Oh, geez.
Yeah, look at the time. Actually. Yeah.
Okay, no, you're not. No, definitely we will not. Look, just to be clear here, though, right? And I'd like everybody to have this as a takeaway from today. The phenomenon we're discussing in this show cycle is not a localized North American phenomenon, not a localized, Himalayan phenomenon, or wherever we want to talk about it. It is clearly a phenomenon that is a global, and I think the profusion of different names for the same kinds of creatures is evidence to that. And it is also not cultural
contamination,
copying, contamination, correct? Because a lot of in a lot of places it predates the arrival of the white men. Now, why is this important? Because it was usually the white Europeans that went everywhere and contaminated the culture, right? We didn't have too many expeditions coming out of North America in recent history, or even out of Asia into Europe, right? Colonizing expeditions. So it's not cross-cultural contamination, because these legends existed before others arrived.
If you walked into a town and you said, look, in other towns they've seen Bigfoot, and they go, what's that? And you say, well, I don't know if you know it by that name, maybe Sasquatch. And then you just start describing it, and then they start calling it Sasquatch, and you might be in a whole nother continent. That would be cultural contamination. But when you say, tell me about where you live, and they say, oh, there's this, up in the mountains, there's these people that come down, they're covered in hair and they're really tall or whatever, right? And you go, really? How often does that happen? Oh, it happens heaps, right? So is it a thing? Yeah, it's a thing. And you get talking and you realize that story matches, without stating anything else, it matches the same story come from other places. It's got to be something.
And that's really the critical thing here, right? And I know it's not popular to make these statements, especially when scientists, say, "Oh no, that's all nonsense. You got rocks in your heads." Well, really, how do we advance anything at all if we all just say the same thing over and over again, just repeat each other's bullshit? Pardon my French, right? We don't go anywhere. There have to be some of us that are willing to say something else. Okay? And that's really our job today.
And our job is also to introduce Jerbe's Roundtable. I hope you're enjoying your Halloween party and this time difference. You I don't know, what is it? An hour back or something, right? Anyway, enjoy it. We'll catch you next week for another Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mickey, and it'll be episode 2 451. Take care.